A man stands at the edge of a trench in the Sindh desert in 1922, and the earth gives way. What John Marshall pulls from that soil will haunt archaeologists for a century, not because of what it contains, but because of what it refuses to show. At its peak, the Indus Valley Civilization stretches across an area larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. It houses more than 5 million people across hundreds of cities. Its sewage systems will not be matched in Europe for 3,000 years. And yet, when Marshall and his team excavate Mohenjo-daro, they find something that should be impossible. No palaces, no weapons caches, no mass graves, no monuments to kings, no temples demanding tribute. Every other civilization we have ever found announces its power. This one is silent on the subject entirely, which means either these people never had power, or they built a system so sophisticated it made power invisible. And when the rain stopped coming and the rivers began to shift, that silence may have been the very thing that destroyed them. And while you're down there, I would love to know, do you think a civilization can survive without centralized power? Or does crisis always demand a ruler? But before our journey begins, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight. A man stands at the edge of a trench in the Sindh desert in 1922, and the earth gives way. What it gives up first is a brick, not a wall, not an arch, not the grand announcement of a civilization asserting itself across the centuries. A single brick lying in the exposed cut of the excavation trench, its corners still sharp, its proportions still exact, its surface carrying 4,000 years of burial as though the earth were merely a temporary inconvenience. John Marshall crouches at the edge of the trench and looks at it. He is a trained man. He has spent his career reading objects the way other men read sentences. And this object is saying something to him in a register he cannot quite place. He picks it up. It fits his hands with an almost unsettling precision, as though it were made to be held, as though someone, 4 millennia ago, sat down with a purpose and a measurement and refused to deviate from either. He sets it down and keeps digging. It is worth pausing here, in this trench, in this heat, before a single word of context arrives. Because the brick is the chapter's entire argument before the chapter knows it has one. Someone made this object to exact specifications, not approximate specifications, not the rough and workable tolerances of a craftsman improvising in the moment. Exact. The dimensions are deliberate, the proportions calculated, the firing consistent enough that this brick, pulled from the earth in 1922, is still structurally sound. Someone decided what a brick should be. Someone communicated that decision across a distance we cannot yet measure. And someone, in a city whose name has not yet been spoken aloud in 4,000 years, obeyed that standard, not because a king commanded it, but because the standard was simply correct, and correctness in this civilization turns out to be its own authority. Marshall does not know any of this yet. He knows only that the brick is precise, and that precision, in his experience, means something. He keeps digging. The site is called Mohenjo-daro, a name given to it by the local people who have always known that the mound in the desert is not a natural formation, that it holds something, that the baked earth beneath the surface has a different quality than ordinary earth. Denser, more deliberate, carrying within it the compressed memory of human intention. The name means, roughly, the mound of the dead. Marshall is about to learn that this is both exactly right and entirely wrong. What lies beneath him is not a cemetery. It is a city, and the city is not dead in the way that dead things are dead. It is waiting. It has been waiting with the patience of something that knows on some cellular level that the right person will eventually come along with the right tools and the willingness to be genuinely surprised. Marshall is that person. He is not, it must be said, a romantic. He is a professional, a British archaeologist of the old school, trained in the assumptions of his discipline and his era with such thoroughness that the assumptions have become invisible to him, the way water is invisible to fish. He arrives at Mohenjo-daro carrying the professional grammar of Bronze Age archaeology, the expectation that civilization, when it announces itself in the earth, does so through the architecture of power. Throne rooms, burial shafts sunk deep enough to swallow a king and all his servants, inscriptions on stone faces naming the man who commanded all of this into being, demanding that the future remember him, demanding it with the particular ferocity of men who build large things because they are afraid of being forgotten. This is what civilization looks like. This is what every dig site in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Aegean has taught him to expect. He does not arrive at Mohenjo-daro expecting to be surprised. He arrives expecting to find, in due course, the king. He finds a street instead. It runs straight. This is the first surprise, and it is a quiet one, the kind of surprise that registers as a slight wrongness before it registers as a discovery. The street is not the crooked, organic, negotiated path of a settlement that grew without plan. It is deliberate. It runs on a grid, oriented to the cardinal directions with an accuracy that requires either sophisticated astronomical knowledge or a governing authority capable of enforcing geometry across an entire urban landscape. Marshall follows it. The street leads to another street, and that street to another. And gradually, the shape of the city begins to emerge from the earth with the patience of a developing photograph, block by block, quarter by quarter. A place that was not built the way cities are usually built, not accumulated over generations of improvisation and argument, but designed, from the beginning, as a coherent whole. Beneath the street, he finds the drain. This is the second surprise, and it is not quiet at all. The drain runs the full length of the street, covered with fitted brick, deep enough to carry the city's waste away from its living quarters with an efficiency that Marshall's own London in 1922 has only recently achieved. He follows the drain. It connects to smaller drains running from individual houses. The houses, 2 stories in places, their staircases still traceable in the foundations, have bathrooms. The bathrooms connect to the drains. The drains connect to the main sewer. Every home in this city, from the grandest structure on the upper mound to the most modest dwelling in the lower quarters, participates in the same municipal system of waste removal. Marshall stands in the exposed trench and does the arithmetic of this slowly, because the arithmetic is staggering. This is not a luxury reserved for the powerful. This is infrastructure extended equally to everyone. He writes the observation in his notes and then stares at what he has written for a long time. He finds the wells next, 1 per cluster of houses, sunk with such regularity across the city grid that they cannot be accidents of convenience. They are placed. Someone decided where the wells would go and placed them with the same deliberateness that governed the streets, the drains, the bricks. 1 well for this cluster of houses. 1 well for that one. Not one magnificent well at the city's center. reserved for those with the access and the status to approach it. One well, accessible, regular, distributed. Marshall circles the word in his notes, distributed, and then crosses it out and writes it again. He is reaching for something his vocabulary does not quite contain. He's trying to describe a civic logic he has never encountered before. A logic that seems to treat water not as a commodity controlled by the powerful, but as a right extended to the housed. He is not certain the word right is appropriate. He uses it anyway, with a small mark beside it, indicating that he intends to return and reconsider. He does not reconsider. The word stays. Then the great bath arrives, and Marshall stops moving for a while. It sits at the heart of the upper mound, a rectangular tank, approximately 12 meters long and 7 meters wide, sunk into the earth and lined with a waterproofing so sophisticated, brick set in gypsum mortar, a layer of bitumen between the inner and outer walls, that it holds water still, in the imagination, if not in fact. 4,000 years after the last hand touched it, steps descend from both ends into the basin. Changing rooms line the sides. A drainage system manages the flow of water in and out with the same meticulous logic that governs everything else in this city. The bath is not a private luxury. It is not a royal amenity. It sits at the civic center, open to the city, designed for communal use, designed with a care and a technical mastery that speaks of something more than hygiene. What it speaks of exactly is where the scholarship falls silent. 100 years of careful argument has circled the great bath without consensus. Ritual bathing, priestly ceremony, public purification, a prototype of the sacred tank that will appear, millennia later, at the heart of Hindu temple complexes. Perhaps all of these. Perhaps something else entirely. Something the vocabulary of subsequent civilization cannot name. Because subsequent civilization did not preserve the concept, Marshall stands at its edge and feels the particular vertigo of looking at an object that is legible in its engineering and illegible in its meaning. He knows what it is. He does not know what it is for. He writes both sentences in his notes, side by side, and the gap between them is the most honest thing in his report. He keeps digging, and here's where the bewilderment deepens into something that will not resolve. There is no palace. He digs where the palace should be, at the elevated center of the city, in the quarter that every other Bronze Age civilization reserves for the residence of the man who rules it. He finds administrative structures. He finds what appears to be a granary, communal in its scale, built to store and distribute rather than to hoard. He finds the great bath. He does not find a throne room. He does not find the apartment of a king. He does not find the burial shaft, sunk deep and rich with sacrifice, where a ruler is interred with the servants and the gold and the weapons that will serve him in the next world. He does not find the carved stele, the inscribed monument, the wall relief depicting a great man with his foot on the neck of a lesser one. The visual grammar of power so universal in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Aegean, that its presence in the archaeological record is not even noted as significant. It is simply assumed. Its absence here stops Marshall cold. He looks for weapons caches. He finds almost none. He looks for iconography of conquest. The king hunting. The king receiving tribute. The king in his chariot running down the enemies of his city. He finds almost nothing of the kind. What he finds instead are small carved seals, precise and intricate, depicting animals and symbols in a script that no living person can read. The seals are trade objects. They are administrative tools. They are the artifacts of a mercantile and bureaucratic culture, not a martial one. They do not name a king. They do not name anyone. They record transactions, categories, identities of a kind that the civilization's commerce requires. They are the language of a system, not the monument of a man. Marshall writes his findings carefully, in the measured prose of a professional who understands that extraordinary claims require extraordinary restraint. The sentences are precise. The observations are documented. The comparisons to other Bronze Age sites are made with appropriate scholarly caution. But beneath the careful sentences, the unease is legible to anyone who reads them slowly enough. He has found a civilization that organized itself, that built its streets and sank its drains and distributed its wells and constructed its magnificent communal bath without the tools his civilization assumes are necessary for organization, without the king, without the palace, without the monument to individual power that every other ancient culture treats as the first and most necessary act of city-making. He picks up a brick from the trench wall and turns it in his hands. The dimensions are exact. He will later learn that bricks of these same proportions, the same ratio of length to width to height, appear at Harappa, hundreds of miles to the north, at Dholavira, on an island in the Rann of Kutch, where the civilization's western edge meets the sea, at dozens of smaller sites scattered across a territory larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. The same brick, the same proportions, the same standard held across 1,500 miles of territory, maintained across centuries of use, enforced by an authority whose nature remains, even now, entirely unknown. Someone decided what a brick should be. That decision traveled. It held. The question forms itself quietly in the dust at Marshall's feet, though he does not yet have the language to ask it cleanly. It is not the question he came here to answer. It is not the question his discipline prepared him to ask. It is older than his discipline, older perhaps than the habit of asking questions at all. Not what happened to these people. What did they know that we have spent 4,000 years forgetting? To understand what the Indus Valley built, you must first understand what the rest of the Bronze Age world is building at the same moment. Not as background, not as context, as contrast. Because the contrast is not incidental. The contrast is the entire argument. The year is approximately 2600 BCE. Hold that number for a moment. Let it settle across the breadth of the known world. In every river valley where human beings have learned to coax grain from soil and store it against the lean season, civilization is arriving at the same conclusion about power. It is arriving at this conclusion independently, in different languages, under different skies, with different gods bearing different names. And yet the conclusion is always the same. Power must be visible. Power must be vertical. Power must be announced in stone so large that no single human life can fully comprehend it. And that incomprehension is precisely the point. On the western bank of the Nile, the pharaohs of Egypt's fourth dynasty are doing something that has no precedent in the history of organized human effort. They are quarrying limestone from the eastern desert, floating it down the river on barges, and stacking it, block by 2.5-ton block, into a structure that will eventually rise to the height of 48 stories and hold that record for the next 3,800 years. The Great Pyramid at Giza is not, primarily, an engineering project. It is a theological statement, It says in the only language that cannot be argued with that one man's will can reorganize the physical world, that the labor of tens of thousands of lives, the coordinated effort of an entire civilization, exists for the purpose of housing one body in its passage to eternity. The pyramid is the pharaoh's name made permanent. It is power given a shape that the human eye cannot take in all at once, and that inability, that enforced smallness of the viewer, is not a side effect. It is the message. Move east, across the Syrian desert, down into the river valleys where the Tigris and Euphrates carry the silt of mountains toward the Persian Gulf. Here, in the city-states of Sumer, the kings of the third dynasty of Ur are practicing a theology of power so complete, so totalizing, that it extends its claim beyond the boundary of life itself. When a Sumerian king dies, he does not go alone. The royal tombs at Ur, excavated by Leonard Woolley in the 1920s, just as Marshall is working his way through the buried streets of Mohenjo-daro, contain the bodies of servants, musicians, soldiers, handmaidens, dozens of them, arranged in careful rows, dressed in their finest, given small cups as if for a last drink before a long journey. The evidence suggests they walk into the tomb willingly, or willingly enough, and drink whatever is offered, and lie down in the dark, and do not rise. This is not cruelty in the sense that the age understands cruelty. This is theology made physical. This is the logical conclusion of a world in which human life is understood as a resource that belongs, finally and completely, to the will at the apex. The king does not merely rule the living. He conscripts the dead. This is the Bronze Age world. This is what civilization looks like in 2600 BCE. From the Nile to the Euphrates, from the Aegean to the edges of the known earth, it looks like names carved in stone. It looks like one man's face reproduced in gold and lapis lazuli, and pressed into the memory of every subject who passes beneath the gate. It looks like the absolute subordination of the many to the singular will of the one, justified by gods, enforced by armies, made permanent in monuments that are still standing when John Marshall arrives with his trowel 4,000 years later. Now the camera turns east, past the Iranian plateau, past the dry passes of Baluchistan where the wind carries grit from 1,000 miles of desert, down through the foothills into the floodplain, into the world the Indus River makes. What you find here does not look like what you left behind. It does not feel like it either. Mohenjo-daro sits on a slight elevation above the Indus floodplain, in what is now the Sindh province of Pakistan. From above, if you could see it as a bird sees it, or as an urban planner's eye might reconstruct it, it reveals itself as a grid, not an approximate grid, not the rough geometry of a settlement that has grown organically along the lines of least resistance. A deliberate grid, streets running north to south, streets running east to west, intersecting at right angles with a consistency that suggests not accident but intention, not habit but decision. The main avenues are wide enough for 2 ox carts to pass each other without difficulty. The lanes between residential blocks are narrower but still regular, still purposeful, still the product of a mind that has thought about how people move through space and has made choices accordingly. But it is what runs beneath the streets that stops you. The drains. They are covered, which means they are not visible from the surface, which means they are not decorative. They are not there to be admired. They are there to work. They run beneath the lanes and connect to larger channels beneath the main avenues. and those channels carry waste and wastewater out of the city with an efficiency that will not be matched on the Indian subcontinent for another 3,000 years. At regular intervals along the street, there are maintenance shafts, openings built into the system at measured distances so that someone, some unnamed person whose title we cannot read and whose face we will never know, can descend and inspect and repair. This is a system designed not just to function, but to be maintained. Someone is thinking not only about today, but about next year, about the decade after that, about the generation that will inherit these streets and these drains and will need to keep them running. Every house connects to this system, not the large houses, not the houses of merchants or administrators or whoever occupies the elevated citadel to the northwest. Every house, the modest two-room dwelling on the residential lane, connects to the same municipal infrastructure as the largest structure in the city. This is not an accident of geography. This is a choice. It is a choice so radical, so foreign to everything the Bronze Age world considers normal, that modern archaeologists spend decades circling it before they are willing to say plainly what it implies. The Indus cities are built on a principle of civic equality so thoroughgoing that it extends to the most basic functions of human biology. Everyone's waste goes into the same system. Everyone's water comes from the same wells. The infrastructure does not distinguish between the important and the unimportant, because the infrastructure has been designed by people who have, at some foundational level, decided that this distinction does not determine access to the city's most essential services. Walk through the residential neighborhoods of Mohenjo-daro and you find something else the Bronze Age world does not prepare you for. There are no walls between neighborhoods, not the walls that matter anyway. Not the walls that say, this quarter is for the powerful, and that quarter is for the rest. The houses vary in size, as houses always do, because families vary in size and resources are never perfectly equal. But the variation does not produce the dramatic gradient you see in contemporary Mesopotamian cities, where the palace district announces itself in carved stone, and the workers' quarters are a different world entirely. Here the gradient is shallow. Here the largest house and the smallest house on the same lane share the same drainage system, face the same street, draw from the same wells. The archaeology does not tell you what people felt about this. It cannot. But it tells you what they built, and what they built is a city that does not, in its physical structure, declare some lives more important than others. At the northwestern edge of the city, on the elevated mound the archaeologists call the Citadel, there are two structures that define the civilization as clearly as any monument defines any other. The first is a large rectangular tank, approximately 39 feet long and 23 feet wide, lined with fired brick and sealed with bitumen to make it watertight. It is fed by a well and drained by a covered channel. It is the Great Bath, and it speaks of water used not for agriculture or survival, but for something else, ritual, perhaps, or purification, or some practice of shared spiritual life that we cannot fully reconstruct. The second structure is a granary, large, ventilated, built to store grain at scale. These are the two things the Indus people choose to place at the highest, most prominent point of their city. Not a throne room, not a temple built to dwarf the human form, not a palace behind whose walls a king's power is made absolute. A bath and a granary. A place for the body's purification and a place for the community's food. The political philosophy of an entire civilization compressed into two buildings on a hill. Now consider what travels beyond the cities themselves. The weights, small, precise, made of chert, graduated in a system of ratios so consistent that archaeologists find the same proportions in Mohenjo-daro and in Harappa, 600 miles to the northeast, and in Dholavira, the great city on the Rann of Kutch, and in dozens of smaller settlements scattered across a territory larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, 1,500 miles of territory, and the same weights. This is not the spontaneous convergence of people who happen to agree. This is administration. This is a system someone designed, and someone maintained, and someone enforced. Not with armies, apparently, because there is no evidence of armies, but with the slower, more durable enforcement of commercial trust. If you trade with the Indus world, you use Indus weights. If you use Indus weights, you are, in some meaningful sense, participating in the Indus system. You are inside it, and people do trade with the Indus world, extensively, remarkably. As early as 2300 BCE, small stamp seals bearing the Indus script, that elegant, maddening script that has defeated every attempt at decipherment, begin appearing in the port cities of Mesopotamia. They appear in trading posts along the Persian Gulf. They appear in places that suggest a commercial network of extraordinary reach, a civilization that is, by any reasonable measure, projecting itself across the known world. But it is projecting itself quietly, through goods and weights and the small clay impressions of seals that mark ownership and authenticity and the completion of a transaction, not through the imagery of conquest, not through the carved record of a king's armies marching into foreign lands, through trade, through the slow accumulation of commercial relationship, of mutual benefit recognized and honored across enormous distances. This is what John Marshall does not have the framework to see clearly when he first stands in the excavation trench at Mohenjo-daro. He is trained in a tradition that reads power in monuments. He knows how to find a civilization's center of gravity by locating its grandest structures, its most elaborate tombs, its most explicit declarations of hierarchy. He has spent his career in a world of named things: pharaohs, kings, dynasties, the great chain of singular wills that the historical record preserves because those wills demanded to be preserved. He arrives at Mohenjo-daro expecting to find, beneath the dust, the same grammar of power that the Bronze Age world speaks everywhere else. What he finds instead is infrastructure. What he finds is the anonymous perfection of a drain that still runs true after 4,000 years. What he finds is a civilization that has looked at the full range of political technologies available to the Bronze Age world: the God King, the warrior chieftain, the priestly hierarchy, the royal tomb filled with the bodies of the unwilling dead, and has, with what appears to be full deliberation, declined them all. What it has chosen instead is harder to see. It does not photograph well. It does not lend itself to the dramatic reconstruction, the artist's rendering of golden thrones and jeweled crowns. It leaves its marks in brick and bitumen, and the careful spacing of maintenance shafts along a covered drain. The world of 2600 BCE is a world of names carved in stone. Khufu, Ur-Nammu, the great names that the Bronze Age insists upon, that it carves and paints and hammers into gold so that time itself cannot erase them. The Indus Valley is a world of names we will never know. The engineers who designed the drainage system, the civic officials who maintained it, the administrators who enforced the standardized weights across 1,500 miles of territory, the traders whose seals appear in Mesopotamian ports, speaking of journeys and transactions and relationships that sustained a civilization for nearly 1,000 years. Their names are gone, every one of them, and that anonymity is not a failure of the record. It is the record itself. The seals are small enough to hold in a palm an inch square, sometimes less, and they are among the most studied objects in the archaeology of the ancient world, because they are among the most maddening. Pick one up, turn it in the light, and the surface yields itself slowly, reluctantly, the way a dream yields itself in the first moments of waking. The carving is precise. The hand that made it knew exactly what it was doing. A one-horned animal stands in profile, its single horn curving forward with an authority that suggests the carver has seen this creature, knows this creature, and yet the creature corresponds to nothing in the fossil record, nothing in the living world, nothing in any other visual tradition of the ancient Near East. A tiger, an elephant, a rhinoceros rendered with a weight and solidity that tells you the person who made this seal has stood close enough to feel the ground tremble. And then, on the most famous seal of all, the one that has occupied scholars for a century, the one that refuses to release its meaning no matter how many frameworks are pressed against it, a figure seated in what looks unmistakably like a yogic posture, legs folded, heels pressed together, arms resting with a particular stillness that is not the stillness of sleep, but the stillness of absolute, interior attention. Animals surround this figure. A tiger, an elephant, a rhinoceros, a buffalo. They are not attacking. They are attending. The figure presides over something that is not a court, and not a ritual, and not a hunt, but seems to contain elements of all three. And every scholar who has looked at it for more than a few minutes has felt the same vertiginous sensation, that they almost understand what they are seeing, that the meaning is close enough to touch, and that it will not be touched. More than 4,000 seals have been recovered from the sites of the Indus Valley Civilization. 4,000 and more. Scholars catalogue them, photograph them, press them against every interpretive framework the discipline of archaeology has ever produced. And in all of that accumulation, in all of those images, in all of those short inscriptions running in sequences that have defeated every attempt at decipherment for more than 100 years, there is not one king. Let that settle for a moment. Not one. No ruler depicted in the act of conquest. No god-king receiving tribute from prostrate peoples. No warrior sovereign with his foot on the neck of a defeated enemy. In Egypt, the pharaoh is everywhere, on the temple walls, on the obelisks, on the papyrus scrolls, in the tomb paintings that follow him into death with the same insistence that attended him in life. In Mesopotamia, the great kings of Sumer and Akkad and Babylon carve their victories into stone with a thoroughness that speaks of pathological need. The need to be seen, to be remembered, to be understood as the axis around which the world turns. The style of Naram-Sin shows the Akkadian king ascending a mountain of bodies, his spear through the throat of an enemy, his helmet horned with divinity. The Code of Hammurabi opens with the king receiving law directly from the sun god Shamash, the transaction depicted in stone so that no one who looks upon it can mistake the source of authority or the identity of its earthly vessel. Against that backdrop, against that saturated, relentless, almost desperate iconography of royal power, the Indus silence is not an oversight. It is a posture, A considered, maintained, apparently deliberate refusal to allow any single human face to stand above all others, to allow any single name to be carved into the permanent record of what this civilization is and what it values. And then there is the script. 419 distinct signs appearing in short sequences, rarely more than 5 or 6 at a time, on seals and tablets and small copper implements and the occasional potsherd. Scholars have been attempting to decipher it since the 1920s, and the century of failure is itself a kind of evidence, not evidence of scholarly inadequacy, evidence of a script that is genuinely unlike anything else. It has no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual inscription, no neighboring tradition that illuminates it by proximity. Every approach that has worked on every other ancient script, the comparative method, the acrophonic principle, the search for royal names of the key, slides off the Indus script without purchase, and part of the reason scholars increasingly suspect is that the script is not doing what other ancient scripts do. It does not record the names of kings. It does not narrate military victories. It does not preserve the speeches of priests or the genealogies of dynasties. It appears in the register of commerce and administration. It appears on objects that move, seals pressed into clay, tokens passed between merchants, small markers of transaction and identity and provenance. It appears where goods are counted and verified and sent on their way. It never appears on walls. It never appears on monuments. It never appears on monuments. It never appears in the grammar of command. What the script refuses to say is as significant as anything it might contain. A script that has no word for king, or rather, a script that has never been found using whatever word it might have for king, is a script that is organizing a different kind of world. Stand now in Mohenjo-daro and look up at the elevated platform they call the citadel. It rises above the lower city on a massive mud brick podium, and for decades after its excavation, scholars assumed this was the seat of power, the Acropolis, the high place from which rulers surveyed their domain. But what sits atop that platform is not a throne room. What sits atop that platform is a granary and a great public bath. The largest structure in the city is a building for storing food and the building for communal ritual cleansing. The highest ground in Mohenjo-daro is given not to a king, but to the mechanisms of collective sustenance and shared civic life. This is not accident. This is architecture as political statement, as visible and intentional as any monument, but pointing in precisely the opposite direction. The scholar Shireen Retnagar, who has spent decades pressing against the assumptions that other archaeologists bring to the Indus sites, offers the clearest articulation of what this evidence accumulates toward. She argues for what she calls a mercantile oligarchy, a governing structure in which authority belongs not to a hereditary sovereign or a divine king, but to the class of merchants and administrators whose competence sustains the civic machinery. Authority here is not inherited. It is not granted by a god. It is earned continuously through the delivery of what the city needs: the grain in the granary, the water in the wells, the functioning drain beneath the street. And because it is earned rather than inherited, because it is justified by performance rather than by blood or divine appointment, it is structurally, constitutionally answerable to the people it serves. The moment the granary empties, the moment the drains back up, the moment the weights and measures are falsified and the merchants of Lothal begin to find that a unit of measure in Harappa no longer matches a unit of measure in Harappa no longer matches a unit of measure in Mohenjo-daro, the authority of those who govern is not merely diminished. It is dissolved. This is the system. This is the grammar of a different power. It is not democracy in the modern sense. It is not a republic with elected representatives and written constitutions. It is something older and in some ways more demanding. A civic order in which the legitimacy of authority is tested not by ritual or inheritance, but by outcome, and in which the physical infrastructure of the city is itself the most legible expression of political philosophy. Every drain that carries waste away from every household, rich and poor alike, is an argument. Every standardized weight that allows a merchant in Dholavira to trust a transaction conducted 1,500 miles away in the trading ports of the Persian Gulf is an argument. Every street that runs straight and wide enough for 2 carts to pass is an argument. Every street that runs straight and wide enough for 2 carts to pass is an argument. The argument is this: we are governed by those who serve us, and the evidence of their service is visible in the world they build and maintain. No other Bronze Age civilization makes this argument, not one. Egypt builds the pyramid. Mesopotamia builds the ziggurat. The Indus Valley builds the sewer. And for nearly 1,000 years the sewer works. The seals move through this system as its nervous impulses, carrying information the way neurons carry signals: small, fast, specific, functional. They are not art objects, though they achieve an extraordinary beauty. They are not religious icons, though they carry images that will echo forward through millennia of South Asian religious tradition. They are administrative instruments, the tokens of a distributed system of trust, each one representing a merchant or a guild or a trading house whose goods can be verified, whose word can be relied upon, whose weightstone has been tested against the standard. The one-horned animal that appears on more seals than any other image may be a clan symbol, a guild mark, a regional identifier. It may be all three. It refuses to tell us, but its proliferation across the full geographic extent of the civilization, from the mountain passes of the northwest to the coastal ports of Gujarat, from the urban centers of the Punjab to the eastern settlements pressing toward the Gangetic Plain, is itself evidence of a network so thoroughly integrated that a merchant arriving in a city 1,000 miles from home can present his seal and be understood, be trusted, be welcomed into the system of exchange that holds this world together. And then there is the figure on the seal. Return to it now. The seated figure, legs folded, heels together, animals arranged around it in postures of attendance rather than aggression. The figure is serene. That is the word every scholar reaches for. Eventually. Because no other word quite fits. Not powerful in the way the pharaoh is powerful. Not commanding in the way Naram Sin is commanding. There is no violence in this figure, no assertion, no performance of dominance. And yet, the animals are still. The tiger does not spring. The elephant does not charge. Something in the quality of the figure's stillness holds them, orders them, commands them without apparent force. Scholars have called this figure a proto-Shiva, a lord of animals, a precursor to the great meditating god who will sit at the center of Hindu cosmology for the next 4,000 years. They may be right. They may be projecting backward from a tradition that will not exist for another millennium, but the image itself, whatever it means, whoever it represents, encodes something that the Indus Valley seems to have understood about power that the rest of the Bronze Age world does not. That the highest form of authority is not the capacity to compel. That the figure who commands the tiger does so not by chaining it, but by achieving a stillness so complete that the tiger has nothing to react against. What the Indus civilization suppresses politically, the towering, self-aggrandizing, monument-building impulse of the god-king. It seems to preserve here, on this small seal, in the image of a power that radiates inward rather than outward, that holds the world in order through presence rather than force. Plant that image carefully. It will matter later. The world the Indus Valley builds is about to be tested by forces that do not respond to stillness, that are not calmed by the quality of a figure's interior attention. The monsoons do not negotiate. The rivers do not respond to civic virtue. The slow drying of the Gagahakra river system cares nothing for the elegance of the political philosophy that has flourished along its banks. But that is the next chapter's burden. For now stands in the weight of what this civilization has accomplished and what it has deliberately refused to accomplish. More than 4,000 seals and not one king. A script that organizes commerce and administration, and never once, in any inscription so far recovered, names a ruler or celebrates a conquest. A city whose highest ground is given to grain and water. A drain that connects every house to every other house in the most radical act of civic equality the ancient world will ever produce. The political idea embedded in the Indus city is as radical as any idea in the history of governance, and it is all the more radical for being expressed not in a manifesto, but in a drain. Power, the Indus Valley seems to argue, is not the capacity to compel. It is the capacity to provide. And for nearly 1,000 years, in the largest urban civilization on Earth, that argument holds. The question the story is building toward is not whether this argument is correct. The question is what happens when the world stops cooperating with it. A civilization that lasts 1,000 years without kings is not lucky. It is engineered. The distinction matters. Luck implies accident, implies that the Indus Valley stumbles into its millennium of stability, the way a traveler stumbles into shade. But what the archaeology reveals, layer by patient layer, is something far more deliberate than fortune. The Indus Valley's long peace, roughly 2600 to 1900 BCE, with roots stretching back another 1,000 years before that, is the product of a set of interlocking civic technologies, so mutually reinforcing, so carefully calibrated to sustain themselves across generations, that the system endures without requiring the constant application of force. To understand how it works is to understand, with a particular and painful clarity, exactly how it will fail. Begin with the granary. Not as metaphor, not as symbol, but as a physical fact, rising from the baked earth of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa both, elevated on platforms of fired brick, positioned at the civic heart of each city, accessible by multiple approaches, administered not by priests serving a god or scribes serving a king, but by functionaries serving the population. Stand before the great granary of Harappa, and you are standing before the closest thing this civilization builds to a cathedral. But it is not a cathedral. It does not reach toward heaven. It does not house a deity or enshrine a dynasty. It houses wheat. It houses barley. It houses the surplus of a good harvest, held in trust against the hunger of a bad one. Every other Bronze Age civilization of comparable scale places something else at its center: the palace, the ziggurat, the royal tomb, the temple complex whose priests stand between the human and the divine and collect their commission for the service. The Indus Valley places grain there instead. This is not an absence of ambition. It is a redirection of it. The granary is the chapter's structural and emotional center because it is the civilization's. Everything else, The streets, the sewers, the standardized weights, the merchant seals, the two-story houses with their indoor wells. Everything else radiates outward from the logic the granary embodies. That logic is this: the purpose of surplus is distribution. The purpose of administration is to ensure that distribution is honest. The purpose of the city is to make both of these things possible at a scale that no individual household, no single village, no isolated farming community could achieve alone. The granary does not belong to a king who distributes it as favor. It belongs, insofar as anything can be said to belong to an abstraction, to the city itself, to the idea of the city, to the 5 million people who live within the reach of this civilization's extended arms and who have, across generations, come to trust that the grain will be there when the harvest is not. This is what the scholar Shireen Ratnagar means when she argues that what the Indus Valley constructs is not the absence of political thought, but its most demanding expression. It is easy to build a palace. It requires only that someone with sufficient force persuade everyone else that he deserves one. It is vastly harder to build a system of negative feedback loops embedded so deeply in the physical fabric of a city that individual self-interest and collective health are made as far as possible to coincide. Ratnagar sees in the Indus infrastructure not the naive egalitarianism of a people who have not yet discovered hierarchy, but the sophisticated architecture of a people who have thought carefully about hierarchy's costs and chosen, deliberately, to engineer against it. The drains beneath the streets are not merely sanitation. They are a political statement rendered in fired brick, a daily reminder that the city's health is indivisible, that the waste of the wealthy man's house and the waste of the laborer's house flow into the same channel and are carried away by the same civic logic. You cannot opt out of the sewer. You cannot build a private one that does not eventually connect to the public system. The infrastructure insists on a kind of solidarity that no law, no proclamation, no king's decree could enforce as reliably. Move outward from the granary through the other interlocking systems and the portrait deepens. The standardized weights and measures, identical sets of graduated stones found across 1,500 miles of territory, from the foothills of the Himalayas to the coast of the Arabian Sea, are the circulatory system of honest exchange. A merchant in Dholavira uses the same unit of weight as a merchant in Harappa. A transaction in Lothal is conducted in the same terms as a transaction in Mohenjo-daro. This standardization is not the product of conquest, not the imposition of a single imperial authority that defeated all competitors and declared its system universal. It is the product of consensus, maintained across generations by the mutual recognition that honest weights benefit everyone in the long run and cheat everyone in the long run when they are corrupted. The system polices itself because the system serves itself. The merchants who use the weights are also the merchants who would suffer most immediately from their falsification. Self-interest and collective integrity are, by design, the same interest. The sewers are the immune system of dense urban life. Any city that concentrates thousands of human bodies in close proximity faces the same biological threat: the accumulation of waste, the contamination of water, the cascade of disease that can empty a neighborhood faster than any army. Every other Bronze Age urban culture of comparable density eventually confronts this problem, and most of them confront it poorly, accepting epidemic as the price of proximity, building their monuments while their populations sicken in the streets below. The Indus Valley confronts it with engineering. Every house, not the houses of the wealthy, not the houses near the civic center, But every house, from the grandest to the most modest, connects to the covered drainage system that runs beneath the main streets. The drains are inspected. They are maintained. There are access points built into them at regular intervals so that workers can descend and clear blockages before they become crises. This is governance expressed as plumbing. This is the state made manifest not in the face of a king, but in the invisible architecture that keeps 50,000 people from dying of cholera. What Ratnagar asks us to understand is that these systems do not operate in isolation. They are interlocking. The granary sustains the population through lean years, which sustains the tax base, which funds the maintenance of the drains, which keeps the population healthy enough to farm, which fills the granary. The standardized weights ensure that the surplus flowing into the granary is measured honestly, which maintains the trust that makes merchants willing to participate in the system, which sustains the trade networks that bring copper from Rajasthan and timber from the Himalayas and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, which gives the city the resources to maintain its infrastructure, which keeps the system running. Pull any single thread and the others hold. Pull several threads at once, and the entire fabric begins to loosen in ways that no single authority is positioned to address, because the system has spent 1,000 years making single authorities impossible. And here, almost incidentally, almost as an afterthought, is the thing worth filing away. The granary system, the great communal heart of this civilization, depends on grain. Grain depends on harvest. Harvest depends on rain. The entire magnificent architecture of mutual benefit, the interlocking systems of honest weights and civic drains and distributed authority, rests ultimately on the assumption that the monsoon will arrive, that the rivers will run full, that the agricultural surplus will be sufficient to sustain the trust that sustains everything else. In times of plenty, this dependency is invisible. The rains come, the rivers rise, the fields fill, the granaries hold more than enough, and the question of what would happen if they did not holds no urgency, demands no answer. The system works so well for so long that the question stops being asked. This is the nature of infrastructure that succeeds. It disappears into the background of ordinary life, becomes the condition of existence rather than its subject, until the day it doesn't. But that day has not come yet. The chapter is not there yet. The civilization is still at its height, and its height is something that deserves a moment of full attention before the silence begins its work. 5 million people. The number requires sitting with. 5 million people living in the largest cities on Earth. Their streets clean and geometrically precise, running straight from one end of the settlement to the other along cardinal directions, as though the city is itself a kind of argument about order, about the human capacity to impose legible form on the chaos of the natural world. The wells are brick-lined and maintained. The houses are built to standard dimensions using standard bricks, the ratio of length to width to height consistent across the civilization, another quiet insistence that no man's house will be built on a different logic than his neighbor's. The children who grow up in these cities grow up in a world where the drain works, where the weights are honest, where the grain is there, where the street outside their door is as clean as the street outside the door of the most prosperous merchant in the city. They grow up, in other words, in a world that makes a particular implicit promise, that the city will take care of its people, that the system will hold, that the anonymous engineers who designed the drains and the administrators who manage the granary and the merchants who use the honest weights have all agreed across generations to sustain a civilization whose genius is not heroic but systemic, not visible in monuments, but embedded in the infrastructure beneath the feet of everyone who walks its streets. No single name rises above the rest to claim it. This is the achievement and the mystery both. The Indus script, still undeciphered, still maddening to every scholar who approaches it, appears on small seals used for trade and administration, pressed into clay to mark a shipment, authenticate a transaction, record an exchange. It does not appear on monuments. It does not appear on the walls of palaces, because there are no palaces. It does not appear on royal tombs, because there are no royal tombs. The script serves the system. The system serves the city. The city serves the 5 million people whose names are as lost to us as the sound of their language, whose faces we cannot reconstruct, whose gods we cannot name with certainty, whose political philosophy we can only read in the negative space of what they choose not to build. What they choose not to build is the monument to the individual. What they choose not to build is the wall between the wealthy quarter and the working quarter. What they choose not to build is the palace that concentrates the surplus in a single set of hands. What they choose not to build is the army whose existence justifies the king who commands it. They build instead the drain, the granary, the standardized weight, the covered sewer with its inspection ports, the civic bath that speaks of shared ritual and shared water, and a shared understanding that the body of the city, like the body of the person, must be kept clean to remain well. There is something almost unbearably moving about this image. The civilization at its height, humming with the quiet competence of systems that work, of a political order so thoroughly embedded in physical infrastructure that it requires no enforcement because it requires no deviation. Because deviation from the system is deviation from survival itself, and the people who live within it have understood this for so many generations that the understanding has passed beyond thought into instinct, into the daily unreflective habit of connecting the drain, using the honest weight, contributing to the granary, walking the clean street. It is the most successful political experiment in the ancient world. It is entirely invisible to the civilizations around it, because it has produced none of the monuments those civilizations recognize as the evidence of greatness. There is no Indus pharaoh. There is no Indus Gilgamesh. There is no great king whose name the scribes carve into stone, so that it will outlast the stone itself. There is only the system, working quietly for nearly 1,000 years, feeding its people and keeping them clean and measuring their exchanges honestly and distributing its surplus without favor. The silence is the achievement. The silence is the achievement. The silence is also already the warning, because a system this elegant, this thoroughly interlocked, this deliberately designed to prevent the concentration of authority, such a system is also, by its nature, a system without a lever. There is no hand on a tiller that does not exist. There is no king to issue the emergency decree, no general to commandeer the granary, no priest to invoke divine authority and redirect the surplus toward survival rather than equity. The same genius that makes the system work in times of plenty makes it, in ways that will only become visible later, constitutionally incapable of responding to the one thing it has never had to face: the monsoon, which has always come, which the entire civilization has learned to take for granted, the way the living take for granted the beating of their own hearts, will one day falter. The rivers will shift, the harvest will fail, and the civilization will look for the hand on the tiller and find, in that terrible moment, only the beautiful, intricate, utterly leaderless machine it has spent 1,000 years building, humming faithfully on, unable to change course, unable to choose, unable to choose, unable to save itself. But the rains have not yet stopped. The rivers still run full. The granaries still hold. The weights are still honest. The streets are still clean. And 5 million people go about their lives in the largest urban civilization on Earth, unaware that the stability they inhabit is not a permanent condition of the world, but a specific, fragile, exquisitely calibrated achievement. One that depends, in the end, on the one thing no engineer can standardize, no administrator can distribute, no civic system can produce from within itself. It depends on the sky. Around 2200 BCE, the sky changes. It does not change dramatically. There is no single season that announces itself as the last good season. No morning when the farmers of the Indus heartland look up and understand that something fundamental has shifted in the order of things. The change arrives the way the most devastating changes always arrive. Not as an event, but as a tendency. A slight and almost undetectable drift in the rhythm of the world. The monsoon comes a little later than it came the year before. The rains, when they arrive, are a little lighter. The rivers run a little lower through the summer months, and then a little lower still. And the men who read the water levels on the great brick ghats along the Indus and the Gagahakra mark their measurements and record what they see. And what they see does not yet constitute a crisis. It constitutes a concern, a trend, a thing to watch. They watch it for years. The scientific record of this climate shift is, by now, extensive and convergent. Ice cores drilled from glaciers in the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau carry within their compressed layers the chemical signature of precipitation across thousands of years, a frozen archive of wet years and dry years, a frozen archive of wet years and dry years, of monsoons that came and monsoons that failed, cave formations in Oman and China, stalagmites built up over centuries from dripping water, carrying dissolved minerals from the rock above. Record in their isotopic ratios the strength and weakness of the great Asian monsoon system across the same period. Pollen sediments drawn from ancient lakebeds in Rajasthan tell their own quieter story. The gradual replacement of moisture-loving plants with drought-adapted species. A botanical record of a landscape slowly losing its water. These sources do not know each other. They are separated by thousands of miles and accumulated over decades of independent inquiry. And yet, they all point in the same direction, at the same moment in time, with a consistency that amounts to testimony. Around 2200 BCE, the monsoon system that has sustained South Asian agriculture for millennia begins to weaken. It retreats northward and eastward. The rains grow shorter, the dry seasons grow longer, and the rivers that carry snowmelt and monsoon water down through the plains begin, almost imperceptibly at first, to change. The Gagahakra river system is the first great casualty. Today it is a ghost. A shallow, intermittent stream in the arid borderlands between India and Pakistan, significant only to hydrologists and to scholars who know what it once was. What it once was is something closer to a lifeline. In the centuries of the civilization's fullness, the Gagahakra flows broad and reliable through the eastern reaches of the Indus world, sustaining hundreds of settlements along its banks, feeding fields of wheat and barley across a vast and productive plain. Some scholars believe this is the river that later Vedic poets will call the Saraswati, the sacred river, the lost river, the river that exists in memory and in hymn, long after it has ceased to exist on the earth. Whether or not that identification holds The Gagga Hakra is real, and its importance to the civilization is real, and its dying is real, and the dying is slow enough to be almost unbearable to contemplate. A river does not simply stop. It retreats. It narrows. It leaves behind in its withdrawal the curving traces of its former banks, what geologists call paleochannels, the ghost geography of water that was. Settlements that once sat close to the water find themselves a little farther from it each season. The walk to the river lengthens. The wells must be dug deeper. The fields at the edge of cultivation begin to fail first, a creeping desertification that moves inward, year by year, toward the center of what had been productive land. The farmers plant closer to the remaining water. They adjust. They are practical people, engineers and administrators and traders, and they do what practical people do in the face of incremental change. They adapt as far as adaptation is possible. And then they reach the limit of what adaptation can accomplish, and they must make a different kind of decision. The agricultural collapse unfolds not as a single catastrophe, but as a spatial progression, a slow domino sequence moving through the heartland of the civilization. The easternmost settlements along the dying Gagga Hakra begin to empty first, not in a single season, but over decades, their populations drifting westward toward the Indus proper, or southward toward the coast, or eastward into the upper Gangetic plain, where rainfall remains somewhat more reliable. The eastern trade routes begin to thin. The goods that once moved along those routes, the carnelian beads, the copper tools, the standardized weights, the clay seals stamped with the undeciphered script, move with diminishing frequency, and then with still less frequency, and then, in some corridors, they stop moving altogether. The silence in the Mesopotamian archives is worth pausing over. In the cuneiform records of and Lagash and the cities of the Tigris-Euphrates plain, there are references to merchants from a place called Meluha, a distant land, a sea trading partner, a source of exotic goods that the scribes of Mesopotamia record with the matter-of-fact precision of men writing down the ordinary business of the world. These references appear in the archives for centuries, and then they stop. Not with any announcement, not with any recorded explanation. The Meluhan merchants simply cease to appear. The trade that connected the two greatest river civilizations on Earth simply ends, and the Mesopotamian scribes, if they notice the absence at all, do not record their noticing. Absence as evidence. Silence as testimony. The same formal structure that runs through this entire story. The missing palace, the uncarved king, the undeciphered script, now appears again at the scale of international commerce. What is not there tells us what was there and what has been lost. Back in the Indus heartland, the cities are beginning to feel a pressure they have not felt before. The populations moving out of the eastern settlements do not disappear. They move. They press westward and southward into regions that are themselves already under climate stress, into cities whose infrastructure was designed for a different set of conditions. Mohenjo-daro, in the later phases of its occupation, shows signs of overcrowding. Houses subdivided, streets partially blocked by new construction that does not observe the old grid's discipline, the careful civic geometry beginning to fray at the edges. This is not the sign of a people who have given up. It is the sign of a people making decisions under pressure, adapting the inherited order to new and unanticipated circumstances, trying to make the system work in conditions for which the system was not designed. And here is where the civilization's deepest intelligence becomes its deepest liability. The Indus political system, that extraordinary, still not fully understood architecture of distributed authority and civic consensus is optimized for a specific set of conditions. It functions in surplus. It functions in stability. It functions when the grain comes in reliably enough that the question of who eats is not a question that requires an immediate and absolute answer. The communal granaries, those great structures that stood as the keystone of social cohesion, as the physical embodiment of the civilization's commitment to collective welfare. The granaries work as long as there is grain to put in them. They work as long as the harvest is sufficient to justify the trust that the entire system is built upon. They work as long as the logic of mutual benefit remains, in the most literal sense, logical. As long as cooperation produces more for everyone than competition would. When the rains retreat far enough, that logic begins to fail. The granary does not transform into a weapon. It does not become the instrument of a new tyranny. What it becomes, in the grammar of scarcity, is something almost worse. A problem without a solution. The system has no mechanism for managed shortage. It has no protocol for the brutal prioritization that genuine scarcity demands. No structure by which someone with sufficient authority can say, this city will be fed, and that one will not. This population will be sustained through the crisis, and that one will be asked to move on. The civilization has spent 1,000 years making such authority impossible. It has built its streets and its drains and its standardized weights and its communal granaries on the foundational premise that no single person, no single institution, no single city will be permitted to accumulate the kind of power that allows one human being to decide the fate of another. That premise served them magnificently in the centuries of surplus. It serves them not at all in the years of want. The scholar Shireen Ratnagar approaches this problem with a precision that is, in its own way, as unsettling as the problem itself. She argues that what the climate crisis exposes is not a failure of the Indus people, but a structural consequence of their success. That a system sophisticated enough to prevent the emergence of coercive power is, by the same logic, incapable of wielding coercive power when coercive power becomes the only available tool. She is not lamenting the absence of a king. She is observing something colder and more instructive than that. That every political architecture carries within it a specific set of vulnerabilities, and that the vulnerabilities of the Indus system are the precise inverse of its virtues. The civilization that has no palace from which to issue emergency commands. The civilization that has no royal granary has no mechanism for the ruthless calculus of triage. The civilization that has made tyranny structurally impossible has, by the same structural logic, made a particular kind of survival structurally impossible as well. And so the populations move southward along the coast, eastward into the Gangetic Plain, where the rains are still coming and the soil is still dark, and the old skills of the Indus engineers, the brickwork, the water management, the administrative habits of a people accustomed to civic order, find new applications in new landscapes, westward and northward, into territories where other peoples are moving. Incoming populations from the Iranian plateau and the Central Asian steppe, carrying their own languages and their own social architectures and their own ideas about authority and the sacred what happens at those contact zones, is a story that will take centuries to resolve and millennia to fully understand. Plant it here, lightly, as a seed in dry ground. The collision of cultures that the climate is now setting in motion will shape the next 3,000 years of South Asian history. But that story belongs to another chapter, another reckoning. This chapter belongs to the rains that came reliably for so many generations, that fed the rivers, that fed the granaries, that fed the cities, that sustained the extraordinary political experiment of the Indus Valley. The rains that allowed a civilization to prove, across centuries of practice, that human communities could organize themselves without the grammar of domination, that the drains could run as deep as the ambition of any king, that the anonymous engineer's masterwork beneath the street could outlast any monument to power. The rains that made all of it possible, and whose retreat makes visible, with terrible clarity, the one thing the civilization's architects could not engineer around. They could standardize the weights. They could straighten the streets. They could connect every house to the same sewer, could fill the granaries and distribute the grain and build a civic trust so durable it lasted 1,000 years. They could do all of this, and they could not make the sky cooperate. The climate does not destroy the Indus Valley Civilization. What the climate does is something more precise and more terrible. It removes the conditions under which the Indus political system works and reveals the absence at its center, the absence of the mechanism for compulsion, for command, for the ruthless prioritization that survival in extremity requires. The rains are retreating, the rivers are dying, and the civilization that has spent 1,000 years making tyranny impossible is about to discover that it has also made emergency impossible. The end of the Indus Valley Civilization is not a moment. It is a process, and it takes 3 centuries to complete, which means that the people living through it do not experience it as an ending, but as a series of adjustments, relocations, and diminishments, each one survivable, each one a little worse than the last. This is the particular cruelty of civilizational collapse. It rarely announces itself. It arrives as a succession of ordinary emergencies. In the first decades, the changes are local. A settlement along the eastern reaches of the Gagga-Hakra River system finds the seasonal flood arriving later than expected. The water lower, the silted deposits thinner and less nourishing than it was the year before. And the year before that, the farmers adjust. They have adjusted before. The civic architecture of the Indus world is built precisely for adjustment. The granaries exist for this reason. The trade networks exist for this reason. The standardized measures that allow a merchant in Dholavira to conduct business with a warehouse keeper in Harappa without a word of shared spoken language exist for this reason. The system is resilient. It has been resilient for 1,000 years. There is no obvious reason to believe this year is different from the difficult years that have come before. But it is different. And the difference accumulates in ways that no single person living through it can fully perceive, because the scale of the catastrophe is too large for any one set of eyes to hold. The monsoon is not merely late, it is retreating, pulling back across the subcontinent in a pattern that will not reverse for centuries. The Gagga-Hakra, which at its height is a river system of extraordinary power, broad, navigable, generous, begins to lose its tributaries one by one. Some are captured by the Yamuna, shifting eastward through the slow violence of tectonic drift. Others simply diminish, their headwaters in the Himalayas receiving less snow, less rain, less of everything the river needs to be a river. The eastern settlements that depend on this system, and there are hundreds of them, representing a significant portion of the civilization's total population, begin to feel the ground beneath their prosperity grow uncertain. They do not panic. That is perhaps the most heartbreaking thing. They do not panic because the system they have inherited tells them not to panic, because the system has always provided, because the granaries are still partially full, and the trade routes are still partially open, and the seals still move through the administrative networks, with their small authoritative impressions, recording transactions, certifying measures, maintaining the connective tissue a civilization that is bleeding from a wound it cannot see. The drains begin to silt up. This detail deserves to be held because it carries within it the weight of everything that follows. The drains of Mohenjo-daro are not natural formations. They are engineered structures, precisely laid, maintained by a coordinating authority that understands their function not merely as sanitation, but as the physical expression of the civilization's central political commitment, that the infrastructure serves everyone, that no household is above the system, that the city works because its people work together to keep it working. When the drains silt up and are not cleared, it means something has happened to that coordinating authority. Not a coup, not a revolution, something quieter and more devastating, a gradual dissolution of the civic will that once made maintenance possible. The people are still there. The drains are still there. What is gone is the organized collective attention that once kept the one clear of the other. The bricks begin to vary in dimension. Archaeologists find this, and they understand immediately what they are seeing. For centuries, the bricks of the Indus cities conform to a ratio so consistent, roughly 1 to 2 to 4 across the entire span of the civilization, that it can only be the product of centralized enforcement, of a standard so thoroughly internalized and so regularly policed that deviation is effectively impossible. When the dimensions begin to drift, when the bricks from one layer of occupation are measurably different from the bricks of the layer below, it means the enforcement has stopped. It means the authority that once coordinated construction across 1,500 miles of territory has quietly ceased to function. No decree announces this. No king abdicates. The standard simply stops being maintained, and the bricks remember the failure in their irregular edges, their varying weights, their silent testimony to a coordination that has come apart. The streets fill with smaller structures, shoddier ones. Archaeologists call this squatter occupation, and the term is clinical in a way that obscures its human meaning. These are not invaders. These are not the incoming populations from the northwest who will arrive later with their different grammar of power. These are the city's own people, the inheritors of the Indus tradition, filling the vacuum of a dissolved civic order with the only architecture they can manage, without the systems that once made ambitious architecture possible. They build inside the old street grid because the streets are still there, still physically present, but they build across the drainage lines and into the public spaces because no one is enforcing the ordinances anymore, because the authority that once drew the line between public and private has grown too weak to hold that boundary. The city is still inhabited. It is no longer governed. Watch what happens to the seals. For centuries, the small stamp seals of the Indus world are the civilization's most eloquent artifact, carved with animals and symbols and that maddening undeciphered script, pressed into clay to certify, to record, to authorize. They are the administrative heartbeat of a mercantile civilization, the physical evidence that complex transactions are happening across enormous distances, that a system of mutual accountability is functioning. They appear in the archaeological record in extraordinary numbers, in every major city, in every period of the civilization's maturity. And then, gradually, they stop appearing, not all at once. The cessation is itself a process, a slow diminishment in the frequency of new seals, a reduction in the complexity of their imagery, a narrowing of their distribution. The last seals are simpler than the first. They travel shorter distances, and then they stop. This is the chapter's central image, and it deserves the full weight of what it means. When the seals stop being made, the administrative language of the Indus Valley Civilization goes silent. Not the spoken language that persists in some form, carried in the mouths of the people who are still living, still trading in diminished ways, still conducting the reduced business of diminished communities, but the written administrative language, the script that has coordinated the largest urban civilization on Earth across 1,000 years of operation, that goes silent. And the scholar Shireen Ratanagar argues something that must be followed carefully, because it leads to an uncomfortable place. The disappearance of the script is too complete, too sudden, relative to the pace of other changes. Civilizations under stress do not typically abandon their administrative languages overnight. They simplify them, corrupt them, allow them to drift, but they do not simply stop. The speed and totality of the Indus script's disappearance suggests something more purposeful than entropy. Ratnagar follows the evidence to its uncomfortable conclusion that the incoming populations from the northwest, documented through shifts in burial practice, in pottery, in the material culture that archaeologists trace through stratigraphic layers like reading a slow catastrophe, carry with them a different political grammar entirely, a grammar of chieftains and cattle, of oral tradition and sacred fire, of warrior lords whose authority rests not on administrative coordination, but on personal charisma, divine sanction, and the controlled distribution of violence. These people have no use for the administrative language of a mercantile urban civilization, and they may have had reasons, political reasons, ideological reasons, the reasons that every new order has for erasing the evidence of the old. To ensure that the language does not survive, the conditional must hold here. This is not certain. The archaeology does not speak with a single voice, but the implication must be allowed to breathe, because if Ratnagar is right, then what is lost in the silence of those final seals is not merely a script, but a political idea, an idea about how human beings can organize themselves without kings, without conquest, without the pyramid of authority that every other Bronze Age civilization treats as the only possible shape of power. The idea is not merely abandoned, it is unmade, buried not only under the silt of failing rivers and the rubble of dissolving cities, but under the active weight of a different vision of what civilization means and who it serves. The populations that migrate eastward and southward from the dying Indus heartland carry fragments of the old world with them. They carry craft traditions, agricultural knowledge, the memory of urban life. But they cannot carry the political system, because the political system requires the infrastructure, requires the scale, requires the critical mass of civic trust that can only be built over generations of shared investment in shared institutions, separated from the cities, reduced to smaller communities, pressed by climate and displacement into the kind of immediate, survival-driven existence that the Indus system was designed to transcend. The refugees of the Indus world cannot reconstitute what they have lost. They can only adapt to the world that is replacing it, and the world that is replacing it is arriving from the northwest with horses and fire and a cosmology in which the relationship between human beings and power is organized entirely differently. The newcomers are not savages. They are, in their own terms, sophisticated. Their oral tradition is of extraordinary richness and complexity. Their understanding of the sacred is elaborate and demanding. Their social organization is capable of considerable coordination, but their coordination runs through hierarchy, through the authority of the priest and the warrior chief, through a vision of the cosmos in which power flows downward from the divine to the king to the people, rather than upward from the civic compact to the collective good. They are building, in the centuries of this transition, what will eventually be written down as the Vedic texts. And those texts describe a world of sacred fire and warrior heroes and divine kingship that is the precise political opposite of everything buried beneath the silted drains of Mohenjo-daro. This is the plant that must be felt without being named. The oral traditions that fill the vacuum left by the Indus script are not a continuation. They are a replacement. A deliberate, structured, ideologically coherent replacement that carries within it no memory of the world it has displaced. Or if it carries any memory, carries it in forms so transformed as to be unrecognizable. The wheel of political imagination turns, and what it turns away from is erased so thoroughly that 4,000 years will pass before anyone realizes there was something there to find. The cities empty slowly. Mohenjo-daro, which once houses perhaps 40,000 people, a population that would make it one of the largest urban centers on Earth in its time, loses its inhabitants in waves, in decades of gradual departure, each family's leaving unremarkable in itself, each neighborhood's emptying a local event rather than a historical one. The Great Bath falls silent. The granaries, once the physical expression of a civilization's commitment to collective sufficiency, stand empty and then begin to crumble. The streets that once ran with the geometric confidence of a planned city fill with debris, with the small structures of the final inhabitants, with the encroaching dust of a landscape that is slowly reclaiming what was taken from it. By 1700 BCE, the great cities are empty, or nearly so. Mohenjo-daro is a ghost town of silted drains and crumbling brick. The script is gone. The weights and measures are gone. The weights and measures are gone. The granaries are gone. What remains is the physical shell of a civilization whose political idea has been not merely defeated, but erased. Buried so thoroughly that when John Marshall's tools break the surface 4,000 years later, he will find the infrastructure but not the memory of how it was governed. The city, but not the name of a single person who built it. He will find the drains, but not the civic compact that kept them clean. He will find the bath, but not the ritual life that filled it with meaning. He will find the bricks in their varying dimensions, and he will understand from their variation that something has ended, but not what was lost when it ended, not the full weight of the idea that went silent with the last seal pressed into the last piece of clay by the last administrator of the last functioning city of the largest urban civilization the ancient world will ever produce. The silence Marshall hears in the earth is not the silence of a people who failed. It is the silence of a people who built something the world was not yet ready to keep. They built a city for everyone. They built a system that trusted its people more than it feared them. They built, in the most demanding sense, a civilization. And then the rain stopped, and the rivers moved, and the world that came after had no language for what they had made, and so it made no effort to remember it. The long unraveling is complete. What comes next is a different story entirely, but it will be told by people who do not know that this one happened. There is a figure on a seal from Mohenjo-daro that scholars call, for want of a better name, the Proto-Shiva, a horned figure seated in perfect stillness at the center of a ring of animals, presiding without force, commanding without gesture, present without domination. It sits in a museum case now, under controlled light, behind glass that no hand touches. The steatite is worn smooth in places where ancient fingers pressed it into wet clay again and again, across decades perhaps, across generations perhaps, leaving no name, no signature, no claim. The animals that ring the figure, a rhinoceros, a water buffalo, an elephant, a tiger, do not flee from it. They do not bow to it. They are simply present with it, as though the stillness at the center is not authority but gravity, a quality of being rather than a declaration of rank. No one knows who this figure is. No one knows if it represents a god, a priest, a mythological being, or something stranger and more radical still. A political ideal rendered in image because the civilization that held it did not believe such things should be rendered in names. It is the closest thing the Indus Valley Civilization has to a portrait of its own governing principle. And it is, characteristically, anonymous. Hold that thought, hold that image. A civilization that spans an area greater than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, that houses perhaps 5 million people at its height, that engineers drainage systems and standardized weights in 2-story homes with private bathing chambers. This civilization, when it reaches for a symbol of its highest authority, produces not a king's face but a seated figure whose eyes are half closed, whose hands rest open, whose animals do not cower. It produces stillness. It produces a presence that does not require the diminishment of anything around it in order to be felt. This is not an accident. This is not the absence of imagination. This is the civilization's self-portrait, and the writer who encounters it for the first time, the archaeologist, the historian, the person simply passing through a museum on an ordinary afternoon, must sit with it long enough to feel what it is saying, because what it is saying is the chapter's entire argument, and the argument is this. The Indus Valley Civilization produces no king's face, no conqueror's profile, no god rendered in the image of a man who owns other men, because the civilization's organizing principle makes such rendering unnecessary and perhaps unthinkable. Authority here is not a face. It is a system, and systems do not sit for portraits. Somewhere in the decades of the early second millennium before the Common Era, someone presses a seal into wet clay for the last time. The script that appears on that seal, those elegant, still undeciphered signs, those marks that have resisted every attempt at translation for 100 years of modern scholarship, appears, and then does not appear again. There is no announcement. There is no ceremony of ending. The administrative language of the ancient world's most sophisticated civic order goes silent, not with a proclamation, but with an absence. One seal that is simply never followed by another. Resist the temptation to make this dramatic. Its power lies precisely in its unremarkability. No one living through it knows it is the last time. The clerk or the merchant or the official who presses that final seal into clay is doing what has been done 10,000 times before in cities from the Arabian Sea coast to the foothills of the Himalayas. The gesture is routine. The intention is administrative. The weight that falls on it afterward, the weight of finality, of civilization ending, of a script that will never be read again. That weight is entirely invisible to the person performing the act. It is only visible to us, looking back across 4,000 years of silence, and the looking is almost unbearable. What dies with the script is not merely a language. Scholar Srin Ratnagar argues something more unsettling than simple entropy. The disappearance of the Indus script, she suggests, is not the fading of a dying culture, the way a fire dims as its fuel runs out. It is suppression. It is an act, or a series of acts, carried out by the populations and power structures that flow into the vacuum the Indus collapse creates. Populations with different organizational logics, different ideas about authority, different relationships to the written word and what it should commemorate. The administrative language of the old order is not simply forgotten. It is buried, and what is buried with it is not only a system of signs, but a memory. The memory that a civilization of 5 million people sustained itself for 1,000 years without kings, without conquest, without the apparatus of organized fear. Consider what that memory contains. It contains clean water, running through pipes beneath streets that are laid out with geometric precision, reaching not only the homes of the prosperous, but the homes of the ordinary. It contains granaries held in common, grain distributed not by the caprice of a ruler's favor, but by the logic of collective provision. It contains a civic equality so radical that modern archaeologists still struggle to name it. The absence of neighborhoods walled off from other neighborhoods, the absence of palace complexes that announce by their scale the absolute distance between the person inside and the person outside. It contains, for those 5 million people across those 1,000 years, something approaching nutritional adequacy, something approaching freedom from organized violence, something approaching the conditions under which a human life can be lived rather than merely survived. These are not abstractions. These are the measurable standards by which historians evaluate the quality of life in ancient civilizations, and by every one of these standards, the populations of the Indian subcontinent in the centuries after the Indus collapse are worse off. The Gangetic kingdoms that rise in the first millennium before the Common Era, those kingdoms with their armies and their temple hierarchies and their elaborate ritual cosmologies justifying the distance between the king and the cultivator. These kingdoms are more legible to history, precisely because they speak history's preferred language. They carve names in stone. They build monuments to individual will. They produce texts that survive because powerful people have reasons to preserve them. They are, by every Indus measure, a regression. And they are what we remember, because they made themselves memorable in the way that power always makes itself memorable. In the way that power always makes itself memorable, by insisting loudly and repeatedly that it exists. The Indus system makes no such insistence. It does not carve its name. It does not build its face into stone. It operates through the slow accumulation of civic trust, through the distributed authority of merchants and administrators and engineers whose names are nowhere recorded, whose decisions are preserved only in the geometry of streets and the depth of drains. And when Ratnagar is right, when the incoming cultures actively suppress even the script, even the administrative marks that might have allowed some future scholar to reconstruct the old logic, then what is lost is not only a people, but a political idea, deliberately unmade, buried not by time but by intention. This is the most devastating fact in the history of South Asia, and it is almost never taught. The civilization that precedes everything, that precedes the Vedic culture, that precedes the great kingdoms, that precedes the philosophical traditions that will eventually produce the Buddha and the Upanishads and the long, brilliant, agonized conversation that the subcontinent holds with itself about the nature of power and suffering and liberation. That civilization is not a primitive antecedent. It is not a rough draft. It is a completed argument, and the argument is suppressed before anyone who comes after can read it. What remains is the silence, and the seals, and the drains, and the weights and measures, standardized across 1,500 miles of territory, still turning up in the earth of Pakistan and northwestern India with a frequency that speaks of how thoroughly this system once saturated the landscape. And the Proto-Shiva, that small, worn rectangle of statite, sitting in its museum case under controlled light, presiding without force over its ring of animals that do not bow. John Marshall, who first pushes his excavation tools into the baked earth of Mohenjo-daro in the 1920s, does not know what to make of what he finds. He is a man of his time, trained in the grammar of civilization as his era understands it. The grammar of kings and temples and monumental architecture. The grammar of power made visible in stone. He finds streets. He finds wells. He finds the Great Bath, that extraordinary public structure that speaks of ritual and shared life, of a community that understands cleanliness as something held in common rather than purchased by the privileged. What he does not find is the grammar he expects. No palace, no royal tomb, no iconography of conquest, and the absence stops him. He writes carefully, precisely, and with the particular unease of a man who has found an answer to a question no one thought to ask. The question is this: what does a civilization look like when it is organized not around the concentration of power, but around its distribution? What does it look like in the physical record of the earth when a culture spends 1,000 years deliberately engineering against tyranny? It looks, Marshall discovers, like Mohenjo-daro. It looks like Harappa. It looks like Dholavira, with its extraordinary water conservation systems, and its stadium-like public space, and its inscription in the Indus script, the largest ever found, mounted above what appears to have been a gate, an inscription that no living person can read, announcing something to no one who can hear it, in a language that the civilization around it has entirely forgotten how to speak. Marshall cannot answer the question he has uncovered. Neither can the century of scholarship that follows him. The script remains undeciphered. The political structure remains inferred rather than documented. The names of the people who built this world, who administered it, who debated within it and loved within it and died within it, those names are gone as completely as if they were never spoken, because the civilization that held them did not believe that any name should rise above the rest. The anonymity is not a failure of record-keeping. It is the record. It is the civilization's most eloquent and most heartbreaking statement about itself. The Proto-Shiva survives. This is the seed planted in the wreckage, the one thing that migrates forward through the collapse and the suppression and the long silence into the religious imagination of the subcontinent, the figure of the yogi, seated, still, eyes half closed, commanding without gesture, powerful without domination. This figure passes into the traditions that come after, becomes an image of authority in the spiritual vocabulary of South Asia, an authority that does not require the diminishment of what surrounds it. It is the Indus political idea preserved in spiritual form, stripped of its administrative context, stripped of its civic infrastructure, stripped of its drains and granaries and standardized weights, but preserved, barely, as an image of what power might look like if power were not afraid. The political idea itself does not survive. The memory that it was possible, that it was done, that 5 million people lived within it for 1,000 years. That memory is buried, suppressed, lost to the silence that Ratnagar identifies as intentional, and that history has largely accepted as inevitable. The civilizations that come after are more legible. They are also more violent, more unequal, more organized around the production of suffering for the many and comfort for the few. They are, in every sense, that the Indus system was designed to prevent exactly what the Indus system was designed to prevent. And they are what we call civilization. The name that was never carved is the most important name in the history of South Asia, and perhaps in the history of governance itself. The name of the system, the name of the idea, the name of the political genius that built a world without kings and kept it running for 1,000 years. It was not carved because the civilization that held it did not believe that any single name should rise above the rest, and so it is gone, as completely as if it never existed, leaving only the drains and the weights and the seals and the silence, and the question that Marshall first heard in the earth at Mohenjo-daro, and that has not been answered yet. Is this how it has to end? For every civilization wise enough to try this. The proto-Shiva sits in its case, the light is controlled, the glass is clean, the animals do not bow. 4,000 years after the last seal is pressed into wet clay at Mohenjo-daro, a political scientist stands at a whiteboard in a university seminar room somewhere. It does not matter where, because the room is everywhere. The room is always the same room, and she writes a list. The fluorescent light hums above her. The markers squeak. The students copy what she writes into their notebooks without looking up. She is describing the institutional preconditions for durable collective governance. She is explaining with the measured confidence of someone who has spent decades on this question. What conditions must exist before any form of self-governance can survive contact with the pressures that will inevitably come for it? She writes distributed authority. She writes standardized rules of exchange that all parties recognize as legitimate. She writes communal management of shared resources so that no single actor can weaponize scarcity. She writes civic infrastructure that makes cooperation more rational than defection. She pauses. She adds one more. She writes no mechanism by which a single individual can accumulate power sufficient to override the system that contains them. She has never been to Mohenjo-daro. She has never held one of the seals. She does not know as she writes these words that she is reciting the specifications of a civilization that built exactly this, in fired brick and engineered drainage and standardized weights, 4,000 years before she was born. She does not know that the argument she is making was already made and tested, and that it held for nearly 1,000 years, and that it failed, and that the reasons it failed are exactly the reasons she is in this room today, still making the argument, still writing the list, still hoping that this time someone will find a way to make it last. This is not irony. It is something heavier than irony. It is grief with a whiteboard. The Indus Valley did not invent democracy. That is not the claim. Democracy is a specific political technology, a particular answer to a particular question, and the Indus people may or may not have arrived at anything resembling it. What they discover, and the word discover is correct, because they find it the way a navigator finds a coastline, by sailing toward it through unknown water. What they discover is something prior to democracy, something more foundational. They discover the material and institutional conditions without which no form of collective self-governance can endure. The drain beneath the street, the grain in the communal storehouse. The weight that means the same thing in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and Dholavira, 1,500 miles apart. The seal that carries administrative authority without carrying a king's face. These are not decorative achievements. They are load-bearing walls. They are what makes the rest possible. And they are gone, and we are still building toward them. The world that fills the vacuum after the Indus collapse is not barbarism. It would be too easy and too wrong to call it that. The Vedic civilization that takes shape in the centuries after the Great Unraveling is sophisticated, philosophically rich, and in many ways magnificent. It produces literature of extraordinary depth. It asks questions about the nature of consciousness and reality that will echo forward through every subsequent tradition of human thought. It is not a lesser thing, but it is a different thing, organized around principles that are the structural inverse of what the Indus system builds. Where the Indus distributes authority, the Vedic world concentrates it. Where the Indus refuses to name the sacred as the property of a specific lineage, the Vedic world makes lineage the axis around which the sacred turns. Where the Indus builds a city where every home connects to the same drain, the Vedic world constructs a social architecture in which you are born determines what you may touch and who may touch you. This is not a fall from grace. It is important to resist that framing because it makes the story too simple, and the story is not simple. What the Vedic world does in the centuries of ecological and social emergency that follow the Indus collapse is solve the problem that the Indus system cannot solve. The problem of scarcity. The problem of coordination under pressure. The problem that arises when the monsoons fail and the rivers move and the granaries empty. And someone must decide, with speed and finality, who gets the remaining grain and who does not, which settlement is saved and which is surrendered to the encroaching desert. The Indus system spends 1,000 years making that kind of authority impossible, and then the emergency arrives that requires exactly that kind of authority, and the system has no answer. The Vedic solution is to concentrate authority, name it sacred, and make it permanent. To say this person decides because the gods have made it so and the gods do not negotiate, it is brutal. It is efficient. It works. And across the following millennia, the temporary emergency logic of hierarchy calcifies into caste, into a social order so durable, so deeply inscribed into the daily fabric of life that it persists in recognizable form into the present century. The cities of the Gangetic Plain are magnificent. They have kings. Their kings are not shy about it. They build monuments to themselves. They leave records. They are remembered. The 3,000-year gap between the Indus civic achievement and anything resembling its successor is not a failure of human intelligence. It is not evidence that the Indus experiment was a fluke, an accident, a civilization that stumbled into sophistication and stumbled back out. It is what suppression looks like across geological time. It is what happens when not only a people but an idea is buried. When the administrative language of a political order is not merely forgotten but unmade. When the seals stop appearing, not because no one needs them, but because someone has decided they should stop. Shireen Ratnagar's argument must be heard here in its full weight. She does not say, the Indus script fades. She says, it is erased. She argues that the disappearance of this writing system is not the natural entropy of a dying culture, not the slow forgetting that overtakes all things when the people who know them are gone. She argues it is an act, a deliberate unmade, Did the populations and power structures moving into the vacuum of the Indus collapse actively suppress the administrative language of the old order, bury it not merely beneath sand and centuries, but beneath an alternative account of what this territory is and always was, and who belongs to it? If she's right, and the evidence she marshals is serious, and it deserves to be taken seriously, then what is lost in the Indus collapse is not only a civilization, it is a political idea. It is the proof of concept. It is the working demonstration that a city can function, that a civilization can endure, that millions of human beings can organize their lives together without a king standing over them with a sword. That proof is buried, and every subsequent civilization that reaches for the pyramid instead of the drain, for the palace instead of the granary, for the king's name carved in stone instead of the anonymous engineer's masterwork beneath the street. Every one of them reaches into a space where that proof once stood and finds only silence, and concludes from the silence that it was never possible, that it was never done, that the pyramid is the only answer because the pyramid is all that is left standing. This is the consequence of erasure, not just forgetting, the active foreclosure of imagination. And yet, the figure that sits in its museum case, the proto-Shiva, the seated lord of animals, the deity or priest or king who is none of these things in quite the way the words imply. This figure does not disappear. It migrates. The idea that the Indus system encodes, that authority can be distributed, that the sacred need not be the property of a lineage, that power can be held in balance rather than concentrated in a single hand. This idea does not die with the civilization that first articulates it in brick and drain and standardized weight. It moves. It changes form. It finds its way into the philosophical traditions that grow in the soil of the subcontinent over the following millennia, into the great questioning traditions, into the schools of thought that ask whether the self that commands must also be the self that serves, whether the God who rules must also be the God who renounces, whether power is most fully expressed not in its exercise but in its rest, reignt. The proto-Shiva sits in its case. It carries this argument in its posture. The stillness, the balance, the animals surrounding it without fear, without submission, without the grammar of domination that every other Bronze Age iconography takes for granted. The argument is not triumphant. It is patient. It is the argument of something that has survived its own destruction by becoming too subtle to be fully suppressed, too fundamental to be entirely erased. The idea goes underground. It waits. It surfaces in forms that do not announce themselves as the inheritance of Mohenjo-daro, because the connection is buried, because the script that might have carried the lineage forward is gone, but the shape of the thought persists. The insistence that the concentration of power is not inevitable, that the human capacity for cooperation does not require a king to activate it, that the drain and the weight and the communal granary are not naive idealism, but practical engineering. This insistence does not vanish from the human record. It goes quiet. It goes very quiet. But it does not stop. John Marshall is an old man when he finally understands the full dimensions of what he has found. Or perhaps he never fully understands it. Perhaps no single person can. He writes carefully, precisely, in the particular prose of a man trained to describe what he sees, without overclaiming what it means. He describes the streets. He describes the wells. He describes the great public bath and the two-story houses and the drains that still run true beneath the ruined city. He notes the absence of palaces. He notes the absence of royal tombs. He writes these absences down as facts, as data, as things that are true about this place and that must be accounted for. Even if he cannot yet account for them, he does not know he is standing at the edge of the most important political discovery of the 20th century. He does not know that the silence he hears in the earth is not the silence of a people who failed, but the silence of a people who succeeded so thoroughly at preventing the concentration of power that they left no powerful individual behind to record their name. The drain still runs true beneath the ruined street. A century of excavation and study and argument has not changed this fact. The drain is still there. It still slopes correctly. It still connects to the system that connects to every other drain in the city, the modest home and the large home feeding into the same channel. The same civic logic flowing beneath all of it. The weights are still accurate to within a fraction of a gram. The standardization that allows a merchant in Dholavira and a merchant in Harappa to conduct business across 1,500 miles without a king to enforce the contract, that standardization is still legible in the weights themselves, still demonstrable, still verifiable by anyone willing to put them on a scale. The seals still carry their undeciphered message, pressed into clay by hands that understood what they were saying, in a script that 4,000 years of subsequent human ingenuity has not yet unlocked. This is not a closed argument. This is an argument still in progress. The silence that rises from Mohenjo-daro is not the silence of a conclusion. It is the silence of a question that has not yet received its full answer. A question that the political scientist at her whiteboard is still asking without knowing she is asking it. A question that every city planner and every constitutional theorist and every person who has ever tried to build a system that distributes power rather than concentrates it is still asking, still circling, still approaching from different angles in different centuries with different tools. The Indus Valley is still speaking. The drain speaks. The weight speaks. The seal, with its undeciphered animals and its undeciphered figures and its undeciphered grammar of a world organized around principles we have not yet fully recovered. The seal speaks loudest of all. It says, "We were here." It says, "We tried this." It says, "It worked." For a long time, longer than most things work. And when it ended, it did not end because it was wrong. It says the argument is not closed. We have not yet learned to listen. But the weights are still accurate. The drain still runs true. And somewhere in a seminar room under fluorescent light, a marker squeaks against a whiteboard and the list is written again, and the students copy it into their notebooks, and the argument that was made 4,000 years ago in fired brick and engineered silence is made again, still reaching for the form that will finally let it last.